Is going on, everybody? Happy football season. The week one edition of the NFL Flowchart show on the Sports Gambling Podcast Network is brought to you by the SGPN Free Roll Football Contest. Join our free season long pick'em for a chance to win $3,000 in a Super Bowl autographed SGP helmet. Sign up now at sportsgamblingpodcast.com/podcast. Stoked to be here, everybody. Thanks for joining me on the live stream. We've got a little bit of a new format here for the flowchart this year. So I'll spend some time here at the top just kind of breaking it down, what the plan is for the year, and then we'll dive right in. It's going on 5 years now that I've been doing the flowchart, which is kind of crazy to see and think about. It started me just kind of rambling on Twitter with some of this, and then all of a sudden, Sean and Ryan reached out to me and brought me into SGPN, and then from there, the rest is kind of history. And it's had a couple different formats throughout the years, but we are ready to rock this year. And one of the best part about this live show here, and it's going to be turned into a podcast as well for all the audio listeners who can't make the live show, but I think there's going to be a little bit more depth to the content this year, just with the live show and being able to kind of chat with people in the chat, answer questions, talk about some alternate views, some alternate routes within the flow chart, and really kind of help fully get the picture of the week, right? And so I think that's kind of the goal for every week, is to set up what the current lens of the fantasy landscape and the DFS landscape on DraftKings is that week. Then we'll go through the cash games flowchart, and talk through kind of what are the couple different outcomes that we can see here from the cash games. And then we'll go into the GPPs, into the tournaments, and talk through some options there. And hopefully we'll be ripping and rolling by the end of it. The goal is every Saturday morning at this time, 8 a.m. We'll be doing the flowchart show, 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Eastern. We'll be doing the flowchart show. Should be a pretty tight 20 to 30 minutes only, I'm hoping. And then after that, the podcast will go live. The recording for the podcast will go live, and then the flowcharts will go up on sgp.com. So yeah, we will I think the best way to follow all this stuff is just follow me on Twitter, John Boy Beats. I'll be firing off links to the live stream. I'll be firing off links to the podcast. I'll be firing off links to the article once it's up, everything like that. And so really be able to kind of get locked in there and follow along. So I think with that, we're just going to dive right in to the cash game flowchart this week. Let me bring this up. So one of the things I think is really important to kind of talk through is playing cash versus playing just GPPs, right? And I didn't start playing cash really heavily until probably 2 or 3 years ago, and I've been playing DraftKings going on 7 years now, I think. And one of the struggles that I always had before I played cash was battling with that concept of like, do I play the chalk in tournaments? Like, this guy's projecting really well. He's probably going to be high on, but shit, he's projecting really well. And just trying to kind of jam him into tournaments. And so what I found is playing cash is really helped me be way more different and way more unique in the tournament play as well. Just because like, okay, I know this guy's going to be chalky this week, so I'll just throw him on my cash lineup. I got some exposure there, then I can pivot off of him, find some leverage, stuff like that in the turn. So I think before we dive into this, and I'm going to walk everybody through it. I know it's these flowcharts can seem a little bit complicated at the beginning. At first glance, it seems like there's way too much stuff going on, but it's really rather simple. And I'll walk everybody through the columns here. And again, one of the reasons that I'm really stoked about doing the live stream version of it, because if you guys have questions, if you want to ask about pivots, if you want to ask about, well, what about this guy instead of this guy, whatever, fire those into the chat and I'll go through them for sure. But week one, I think, is just a really awesome opportunity in the DFS landscape. Number one, because we don't know anything. Like, we literally know nothing about anything. We think we know things. and then we see the Chiefs lose to the Lions on Thursday Night Football, and it's like, okay, yeah, we don't know anything yet about this year. And so if there's decision points, or if there's players that are getting talked about a lot on shows, or are getting steamed up and seem like they're going to run into a lot of ownership, I think this is just the greatest opportunity to pivot off of those, and to find some leverage elsewhere and to find some low owned plays, because more than likely the chalk isn't going to be that great this week. And because a lot of people have been playing best ball all summer. A lot of people have been, really staring at these salaries on DraftKings for the last few weeks. But getting to the point where you're really locked in, what the route trees are going to be, or route shares are going to be, where targets are going to go, stuff like that, just isn't really going to happen until the first few weeks here. So, with that being said, I do think that week one is also a really nice opportunity for you to Paul saying Lions aren't that bad. 6-point dog, not that big of a deal. You're right, it isn't. And but it was a great upset to start the season on Thursday Night Football. Uh, so anyways, jumping into basically the week one overall kind of picture, call it the landscape. you know it- Salaries are really soft this week. There's a lot of great value. I have some sheets that maybe I'll pop up at the end if we're running through questions, but I've got some sheets that I use every week that throws in projection, throws in ownership, kind of color coordinates things. And basically blue means like it's really good, green means it's all right, and then all the other colors mean not too good. And every week there's usually a handful of blues, and this week the sheet is just peppered with blue. And so there's a ton of great options, ton of ways that you can't really go wrong. And so, we'll get into this with the tournaments, but I would say, like, don't take too many hard stances this week. I would try to get, if you're planning on playing 5 or 10 or 20 different lineups this week, I would just try to get as many different combinations as possible, get as many different variations as you can, try to attack multiple games. Don't just get, hopped up on one game itself. But yeah, it's a really great opportunity. And as we get, like, if we're in week 15 of this year, things are a lot more efficient. Salaries are a lot more efficient. Players are a lot more locked into their roles, and the swings of value start getting a lot smaller. So, anyways, that's a long way of saying let it rip on week one, and really kind of get crazy with the combinations. But let's start with the cash games. We'll do this every week. We'll start with cash, and then we'll move over to the GPP. So the first column of the flow chart is going to be the cash game locks. Now, there could be some argument here of, like, are these all really truly the locks? Like, are you 100% playing these no matter what in your cash game lineup? And I mean, part of the problem here, or no, I won't call it the problem, but part of the things that I try to run into here with the flow chart is being able to have a couple different options within the flow chart that all really make sense and all uh, equal viable cash lineups. There is kind of a core that you really kind of start out with, and that's basically what this cash game lock is kind of that core. Maybe I'll change the verbiage to the core. And these, like, for this week it's 4 players. These are really what help set up the rest of the lineup. So for this week, it's 2 running backs that I think are going to be very heavily owned in cash, and that's Raheem Mostert with the Dolphins, 5,400, and Jamal Williams with the Saints, 5,100. We know Jeff Wilson's out for the Dolphins. We know Alvin Kamara is out for the Saints. There's also a chance that Kendre Miller is out for the Saints as well. So I just think both of these running backs are going to get a lot of opportunity. The real only um, uh, competition for Mostert is Devin Achane, who's a rookie and has had, a little bit of an up and down preseason, and then Salvin Ahmed, who, had actually a pretty good preseason, but has never really been a true, reliable NFL player. So I really think these guys are locked in for some pretty good volume, and at the low 5,000 range of salary, they're going to be in a lot of cash lineups. So I think you want to have them there. And then Justin Jefferson, 8,800. He's just a priority for me in this Minnesota Tampa Bay game this week. You can easily get to this. We'll see at the end how we're going to fit a lot of stud wide receivers in this week. But I just think anytime you can get the best receiver in the league, healthy, in an environment that I think has a sneaky chance to be a shootout, maybe previewing the GPP flow chart a little bit there. But you got to kind of plug in J Jeff, and then we'll kind of figure out the rest from there. And then defense wise, the Commanders, everybody knows the Cardinals are going to be one of the worst teams in the league this year. You could argue they've already started tanking for Caleb Williams. So loading up the Commanders defense against the Cardinals at 2,800 is going to be the most popular defense this week. No questions about it. I would probably say that they're a pretty easy fade in tournaments. And then I would say, like, you almost have to 100% lock them in cash. And, that may be a little bit of a controversial topic and something that people ask questions about is like, why, you know, defense is such a hard position to project, right? It's so volatile. There's so many different swings and things that happen that make the defenses different every week, and the Commanders could easily dud out and score 4 points, while the Raiders or somebody right around them scores 8 or 9 or 10 points. And I think the genesis of why you play the Commanders in cash this week is like there's an opportunity that they're 70-80% owned. And so you almost just kind of want to follow the crowd there, because if they do have a pick six and they do score 12 points or whatever, and your the defense that you picked scores 4 or something, then you're just like having a really bad day. You ruined your weekend just because you try to get different at a defense. If they dud out and they only score 4 points, but 80% of the field in your cash games where you're only trying to beat 50% of the field, 80% of the field have the Commanders, then you're not dead. It doesn't matter at all. They score 4 points, so does 80% of your playing partners, and you're still alive because you're hoping the rest of your lineup can beat half of the field. So no problem at all playing the chalky Commanders defense in cash. I would always recommend, if there's a defense like this that really stands out from an ownership standpoint, you got to follow the pack there on defense. Okay, so now the fun part of the flow chart begins. We get to choose our kind of path here for quarterback. And I think the two quarterbacks that really help the flow chart come together this week is the high end, Jalen Hurts at 7,800, and then the low end, Anthony Richardson at 5,600. And I think both of these guys are projecting very well. Both of them are, going to be running the ball a lot. Obviously, Jalen Hurts is a lot more of a sure thing when it comes to passing than Anthony Richardson. A lot of people are expecting A Rich to have a rocky rookie season. And Paul in the chat is saying, I know you're all on the A Rich train, but man, I'm scared of that O line and no RB threat. And yeah, I agree with you, Paul. And again, Richardson's my highest owned player in best ball. I've got over 20% of them on my teams. But the thesis of that play was, hey, he was a 10th, 11th round pick. He probably has top 5 QB upside, top 7 QB upside if things go right, just due to his running ability. And so if he starts figuring things out at the end of the year and he's able to jump into that higher tier of QB play, then you're kind of cooking with gas in best ball. From a cash game standpoint, I am pretty nervous about playing him this week, just because of all of the rhetoric out there about how he's inaccurate, how his O-line sketchy, stuff like that. And so it is definitely an important decision point to make, but also his running ability and his legs give him that nice floor that we really like to see with the cash game quarterbacks. I'm just not sure the ceiling is really there. And I think shooting for ceiling is something that's a little bit of a untalked about thing in cash, but you do need to kind of keep the ceiling open in your mind. You got to kind of be thinking about the ceiling outcomes, because that extra ceiling boost, that extra whatever, may push you from 60th percentile up to the 40th percentile and over the cash line, right? So yeah, those are kind of the two decision points: Jalen Hurts and Anthony Richardson. Obviously, the $2,200 between the two of them is going to be pretty important, and we'll talk about that in the last column for the stud wide receivers. So once you pick your quarterback path, then you can basically pick what you want to do with the $3,000 window. So there's 3 wide receivers, I think, that really stand out this week at 3K. And I believe almost everybody is going to have a $3,000 wide receiver. And then there is a couple really good cheap tight end options as well. So let's start with the receivers. First, you've got Marvin Mims, who's a really great value at 3,000 on the Broncos. Um, Things are trending like there should be no Jerry Judy. Um, and so it should just be Marvin Mims and Cortland Sutton, and he should be on the field quite a bit. Obviously, we'll have to keep our eyes on whether Judy is truly inactive or not. I don't think that's officially come out. Next up at 3,000 is Jaden Reed. And so this is a guy, rookie for the Packers. Mims is rookie as well. Rookie for the Packers, Jaden Reed. Obviously, we've already got Christian Watson ruled out. So you would expect Jaden Reed to be in the second wide receiver behind Romeo Dubs this week, running pretty much every route for the Packers. So that's a great value at 3,000. And then, of course, we've got Tutu Atwell as well, who at $3,000 is seeing a great value due to no Cooper Cup this week. So really, really big trend with all three of these receivers, right? Men priced and opportunity has opened up because the call it the stud receivers on their teams are all out this week. So Tutu Atwell is again $3,000 between Van Jefferson, Tutu Atwell, and Tyler Higbee. That should kind of be the main core there for the Rams. I am probably going to be picking between Mims and Reed, mainly because I think Tutu Atwell. There's a rookie on the Rams, Puka Nakua. I think I'm saying his name right. That could be challenging Tutu for that wide receiver two spot, and it could happen as early as this week. He's been getting a lot of good reviews out of camp, and so I think just that extra little risk, plus the fact that Tutu's only 115 pounds or whatever he is, just kind of makes me get off of Tutu. But he is projecting well. He is a good option, and you won't look stupid for playing him if that's kind of the lean you want to go to. So I'm most likely picking between Mims and Reed this week, and I think part of that actually has to do with what I'm going to end up doing at tight end. So Isaiah Likely is $3,000 at tight end, and he is going to be the best projected tight end if Mark Andrews is ruled out. So obviously, big caveat there. Andrews has kind of been questionable, missing practice this week, stuff like that. And so if Andrews is ruled out, then Likely becomes a really, really good, strong tight end play here in week one at $3,000. The other option I have on here is Luke Musgrave for the Packers at 2,900. He's also a rookie, but there's the Packers just have not been running a very deep rotation of pass catchers throughout all of the preseason series that Jordan Love played in. It was pretty much exclusively Christian Watson, Romeo Dubs, Jaden Reed, and Luke Musgrave running all of the routes when Jordan Love was playing in the preseason. And so I think that's really going to translate here to the regular season, and Musgrave's just going to be on the field a ton. And you take away Christian Watson from that pairing, and he's just gonna get some volume. He's gonna get some passes, he's gonna get some work. And at 2,900, that's really all you want from a tight end. You want him to be on the field a lot and you want him to get some action. And I think they're gonna pamper the rookie a little bit. So yeah, that's kind of the 3K window there. Both, every combination here kind of works with the previous two paths. So you can fit in, if you go Richardson, you can go Likely or Musgrave and one of these receivers, obviously, because the pricing's all pretty similar. I think the one thing to think about is whether you want to make the decision of having two Packers in your lineup, right? If you end up going Reed and Musgrave, that may be something that potentially leans you away. But I think if Likely does pop up as a great tight end value, then pretty easy to just go one Packer there and go Likely and Reed, or go Mims and Musgrave, stuff like that. Joe brings up a really good point. Great thing about all the three K receivers is they all play in the late games, so you can wait on news on all of them and or pivot. Yeah, and this is a really important thing to think of, right? So um, I got to check. Let me check real quick if I'm not super locked in yet on game times this week. Let me see. Okay, so Philly also plays in the late game, and Indy plays in the early game, right? So here's a great example of like why you would maybe want to swap coming into the late game. So let's say when things are all said and done, projections are showing, Mims is going to be like double the ownership of Jaden Reed, right? And you decide you want to take the Anthony Richardson path. Now, so if you take the Anthony Richardson path, then you're going to be loaded up with receiver. Um, at the receiver spot with Tyreek Hill and Jamar Chase. So I'm kind of jumping the gun here, but that's what you're going to end up with. And I'm just checking to see Tyreek. Plays in the afternoon, right? So if Anthony Richardson puts up like, I don't know, 12 points or something like that, and you know that there's like a ton of Jalen Hurts teams that you're going to be up against that probably have Marvin Mims, well, maybe there's a position that you pivot from Mims to Jaden Reed or even down to Tutu Atwell, right? And you just hope that that 3K receiver outscores the other 3K, and that's enough to move your kind of potentially dead Richardson lineup up above the cash line in the afternoon. So, you kind of important to kind of think through some of these things in the afternoon window. If the big decision point of the week is Richardson versus Hurts, and Richardson kind of duds out in the morning, while Hurts is probably, I mean, obviously there's a chance that he duds out, but we expect the floor for Hurts to be a lot higher than we do for Richardson. So if Richardson does dud out, then I think it's worth trying to think through like potentially putting a Tutu Atwell in there, potentially doing a fading or playing Jaden Reed to get some extra leverage in the afternoon. So, anyways, so that's that, and then getting into the last column here for the stud wide receivers. So if you go the Anthony Richardson route, right? We saved 2000 about 2200 bucks at the beginning picking him over Hurts. Then you can fit both Tyreek Hill and Jamar Chase into your lineup. Which is pretty freaking awesome if you think about it, right? If you told me at the end of best ball season here that I could have basically the first 3 picks in every single best ball draft, Justin Jefferson, Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, in my week 1 cash game lineup, I'd probably be taking that happily and running with it, right? So that is definitely the big plus of picking Anthony Richardson is you can fit in all 3 of the stud wide receivers. And so again, talking through that decision point, right? Yeah, or maybe here I'll jump through Hurts first, and then we can talk through what the decision point really means again. So if you go Jalen Hurts, then we've got to kind of figure out how to save 2200 bucks. And my preferred option this week is Kenneth Walker on the Seahawks. And I know people are a little bit nervous about him. He showed up on the injury report yesterday, but from everything I've seen, sorry, he wasn't on the injury report, but he did have a limited practice, or maybe he didn't practice, one of those things. And so I think that's just a maintenance day. He had some issues over summer, but he didn't show up on the final injury report, I believe. Again, not fully locked into every single thing here in week 1, but I think that was the final outcome. Not in the injury report, just get practiced. So I think all systems are a go there, and we think the Rams are probably going to be one of the worst teams in the league this year. So I think he's a pretty good cash game option. And the floors on these running backs are usually pretty safe for cash, right? Versus some of the receivers. Now you could argue Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson have pretty safe floors as well. But generally speaking, running back floors are a little bit more safe than wide receiver. And then depending on whether you chose Likely or Musgrave, which is $100 difference, then you just fit in Hill or Chase, which is also $100 difference into that last final roster spot. So that's kind of how everything comes together in the flow chart. Again, if you want to we can basically kind of talk through the what the option is, right? What the call it the 2v2 is really, right? So it's going to be Anthony Richardson and you know Hill or Chase, whichever one you don't have in your Hertz lineup. So for purposes of this, let's say it's Anthony Richardson and Tyreek Hill versus Jalen Hurts and Kenneth Walker, right? That's kind of the 2v2, assuming you have Jamar Chase in both lineups. And so Anthony Richardson plus Hill, Hurts plus Walker. Do you think that if Richardson duds out, Hill can outscore Walker by enough and keep pace with Hurts outscoring Richardson? That is basically the decision point that we have to make this week. So I think that is a pretty good summary of cash. Again, there's a lot of things that change this week. Hopefully, there's not as many things that change. But sometimes there are things that change. There is last minute news. There are random people getting ruled out that really make certain guys pop on Sunday morning. And so for that, I would just say, give me a follow on Twitter. I always shoot an update out to this. I'll always like quote tweet it or retweet it or say, hey, everybody, X, Y, and Z is now like a lock. Make sure to get him in. pivot this around or move some things around or whatever, right? I'll try to do that for both. I always do that for the cash, and then when there's different things that go on in the GPP, I also do that as well. Okay, so we got a pretty good landscape, pretty good understanding of the um, cash game lineup here, and now I will share the GPP flow chart for everybody. And I think this is a good time to drop in our sponsorship ad here. So NFL is here, and DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL, is giving you a can't miss offer for week one. This week, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets instantly when you bet just $5 on any NFL game. DraftKings is hooking everybody up with game day greatness. All customers can take advantage of two new offers every single game day this September. Check the app to see what you get. Download now and use code SGP to sign up. New customers can take home $200 in bonus bets instantly just for betting $5. That's code SGP only on DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for details and state-specific response to gambling resources. Bonus bets expire 7 days after issuance. All right. There we go. So now let's jump into the GPP tournament. So again, before we dive in here, let's talk through the landscape a little bit this week. And really, there's one game that is majorly popping off, and I think that's going to be the Miami Dolphins and the Chargers game. It's got the highest total on the slate by quite a bit. And I think there's going to be a lot of ownership and a lot of people congregating around that game. So um, the way that I build out the flowchart is I typically always try to have a double stack, which would be a quarterback and two pass catchers. And then we're always going to want to bring it back with a uh, pass catcher, running back, tight end, really anybody from the opposite team in that game. And really, the idea there is you get four players out of your nine from one game, and you hope that that game environment really goes off, right? Because if there's a high scoring game, I think a famous example of this is right Ravens and Dolphins last year in week 2 or 3 where it was like 45-41 or whatever, and all the Ravens, all the Dolphins just went off, and that's like who you needed to win tournaments that week. And so we're just basically making a bet that a game is a shootout. It drags all the players with them, and you're really kind of condensing the things that you need to get right, right? Because if you create a team with 9 different players in one of these tournaments where you need to get to the top, where you need to finish first, that's basically a 9-leg parlay, right? Which could work, right? In theory, that could work. You could nail the highest scoring player on every team, and that could really bubble up to a great win. However, it's a lot easier to make like a 6-leg parlay and eliminate like four of those guys or whatever. Have that all be one of the bets, and then just tack on the other 5 or 6 leg parlay at the end, and hope that bubbles you up to the top. So, anyways, that's kind of the concept behind the double stack and the bring back. Really focusing on what game, hoping it's a shootout, and then another thing, which we'll talk to in column 3 here, is the secondary stack. So I oftentimes like tossing in a secondary stack as well, which would just be 2 players from one game, right? And no quarterback, obviously, in that scenario. So starting off, I really think that this Vikings Bucks game has some sneaky potential this week. I don't think the Vikings defense is very good, and I just don't think the Bucks are very good at all. But we've seen that Baker can let it rip. We've seen that he's got some weapons. We know he's got Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, both healthy here at the beginning of the season. And so, if there's a shot that they go off, I feel like this is one of the better opportunities, good as ever. And I also kind of like Tampa Bay as a sneaky underdog money line pick to upset the Vikings here. So if Tampa Bay is doing some scoring, then obviously that's pushing the Vikings as well. And I think this game could be a little bit of a shootout. So we're going to start with Kirk Cousins plus Justin Jefferson, and that's going to kind of be in every one of your flowchart lineups. Yeah. Oh, maybe it's a good spot for me to talk about how the flowchart works. So basically, as you kind of go through the flowchart, and we'll walk it through for everybody, walk it through for the audio listeners. Obviously, make sure to check out the actual flowchart itself on when I post it on the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. But the idea is you're able to build 5, 10, 20 different lineups with it, and they're all going to be correlated well. They're all going to be, have maybe some decent leverage spots, and generally speaking, going to be well built lineups, right? And so that's the idea is, you can just build one with it. You can build, you can enter the 3 max tournaments with it. You could enter the 20 max. I'm sure there's ways that you could get over 20 teams, but more than likely in the 10 to 20 range is kind of how this thing's going to work, and some of the different options that you can make with it. So Kirk and JJeff to start it off. Those are going to be kind of locked into every lineup for me. And then you're going to choose one of TJ Hawkinson at tight end or Jordan Addison at wide receiver. The difference between the pricing there is about $800. So that'll be important to kind of factor in later. So yeah, so that's your double stack. Vikings double stack, and then we're gonna bring it back with either Chris Godwin at 5,900 on the Bucks or Mike Evans at 6,300 on the Bucks. And so the way I've set up the flow chart is Chris Godwin, the cheaper guy, is paired with TJ Hawkinson, the more expensive Viking, and then vice versa for Addison and Mike Evans, pairing those guys up. So helps offset some of that $800 difference. And now we're looking at basically a $400 difference as we go down these paths. And this stuff doesn't really matter that much, guys, but for a sense of how I build this flow chart out and how I try to make as many options as possible, that's kind of some of the considerations I have to try to make sure each path is staying roughly on the same roughly in the same salary range. But of course, like, you can obviously pair. You don't have to just pair TJ Hawkinson with Chris Godwin. Like, if you're going to be making 15 or 20 lineups, obviously pair some Hawkinson with Mike Evans, and then just kind of tinker a little bit at the end here. So yeah, that's the bring back options. Chris Godwin, Mike Evans. I think those are two really great options. The Bucks should be a pretty condensed receiver tree on Tampa Bay. And then I've got two running backs here that you can pick from that I want to just get a running back into the lineup now. And so I've got Brian Robinson on the Commanders, and I've got Miles Sanders on the Panthers. And I think these are actually a couple pretty good leverage spots right out of the gate here. So Brian Robinson is 5,100, which is the same as Jamal Williams, who we just talked about in the cash game flow chart, which I think a lot of people will be playing Jamal Williams. And so same price point, half the ownership, pretty much half the ownership or less maybe, and pretty much the same projection, same ceiling, stuff like that from Brian Robinson. So I think that's a pretty good bet. Samaje Perine is also in this range at 5,100 and is pretty similar play to these guys. And then same kind of thing for Miles Sanders, right? So Raheem Mostert, we talked about in the cash game flow chart. He's going to be the popular guy at 5,400. And Miles Sanders has a little bit better of a ceiling outcome this week, I think, and really similar, really similar build to Raheem Mostert from a projection standpoint. So just kind of thinking through those two running backs right there and how they provide a little bit of leverage on the field, a little bit of pivots, right? If you think like, okay, people are going to build this lineup out, and then instead of Brian Robinson, they're going to put Jamal Williams in. Okay, cool. So if you pick Brian Robinson instead of Williams, then you just differentiate yourself a little bit from the field and you gain some leverage to try to get to the top. So that's kind of the thinking there between those two guys. But there's actually a decent amount of options in the low to mid 5,000 range this week for running back. And then so that's the bring back in the running back column. Then we're going to move over to the secondary game stack. I don't always work in a secondary game stack, and you could actually make an argument that week one is probably the week where you need to lean on correlation the least, right? And because of all the different value, all the different options out there that are projecting really well, is you don't really need to have correlation to be that thing that's the cherry on top that pushes you up to the top most likely. But it is a fun way to build. It is a fun way to kind of attack some game environments. And so that's where we're going this week. So if you went the tight end route with Hawkinson, then we're going to be able to fit in Raheem Mostert and Mike Williams as a secondary game stack. So we'll get the second running back. We'll eat a little bit of chalk there with Mostert, and we'll get Mike Williams in there at 5,700. I just don't really think Mike Williams should be that much lower than Keenan Allen this week, and I think he's like 1,500 bucks lower. He was. I just, if they put Williams in with the big slot and the sneak Kellen Moore offense, I think that's going to be a pretty fun matchup for him. So I really like that option here. And then again, it's really good leverage, right? So you got Brian Robinson and Raheem Mostert, 5,400, 5,100. A lot of lineups, like we just talked about in cash, are going to have Raheem Mostert and Jamal Williams. So simply pivoting to Brian Robinson at the same price point as Williams is a really great spot there. And then if you went the wide receiver route with Jordan Addison, then we need to get a tight end to the picture. So I've got two different options here. The first one is the Cincinnati and Cleveland game. So Joe Mixon and David Njoku to fit in the tight end spot. Joe Mixon 6,800, David Njoku 4,200, and then the other option is Kenneth Walker and Tyler Higbee. Kenneth Walker 6,000 for the Seahawks, Tyler Higbee 4,800 for the Rams. Now, I think the Kenneth Walker and the Tyler Higbee is probably going to be one of the more popular pairings this week. Both of those guys should be pretty well owned. Same with Mostert. Mostert should be well owned. Mike Williams, not so much. And then I think Mixon and Njoku kind of will be mid tier here. Nothing too crazy. But as we kind of think through this column here, the secondary stack column, and we think through the last column, which typically is just kind of like a fill in the gap with the last player, that's where it's important to think through like, okay, what if I built to date on the flowchart, right? I've picked a couple chalky guys or I picked a couple popular guys. So this last one, I'm going to need to play a guy that's a little bit lower owned versus if you've kind of strung out some leverage spots between, then you can fit maybe a more popular guy in at the end with the last pick. And so it's just important to kind of realize where we're at within the flow chart here and how you're building that specific lineup. I will make a couple points here. It isn't too hard to if you did go the TJ Hawkinson route, you aren't totally you aren't totally constricted to just Dolphins and Chargers. You could play Van Jefferson instead of Tyler Higbee and get Kenneth Walker and Van Jefferson there. That's only $100 difference. Not as clean in the Cincinnati and Cleveland game. But one of the pivots that you can also make if you're fitting in the Cincinnati and Cleveland stack is Joe Mixon and T. Higgins are the same price this week at 6,800. So plenty of options there. And you can, again, if you're making 20 lineups, you probably want to swap out a Mixon for T. Higgins in there and just make sure you cover your running back in the last column here. So, anyways, a lot of different options, a lot of different ways to get some good correlation. And basically, what you're going to be left with in the last column is about $4,000 to $5,000 worth of salary, depending what path you took and stuff like that. I should mention I threw some defensive options here in the middle of the second column. Usually, I don't really highlight defense too much. I do make sure that it's factored into the pricing and into the way that the flow chart works. But basically, I think there's just a ton of viable defenses this week. And I am usually a scroll down guy at defense, and I just take somebody near the bottom of the barrel, especially in this week, which when again we just don't know anything, we don't know what's going on. I would definitely fade the Commanders in GPPs. I would not play them because they're probably going to be 3 to 4 times the field in the Million Maker, which just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And at a position that's really, really volatile. So there's a ton of great options below 2,600 this week, and I included some on the flow chart here: Houston, Raiders, Cardinals, Panthers, Titans. Again, any of these teams could probably just win outright, and it wouldn't be the craziest thing that happens in week one. So targeting some of the bottom barrel defenses, I think, is totally fine. And so, anyways, that kind of factors into that final piece I was talking about, where you'll have between $4,000 and $5,000 left. And so then you kind of decide based on what your lineup's telling you from a running back, receiver, flex standpoint, what you need to fit in here. So I included two different running back options, Samaje Perine at 5,100 and Deion Jackson at 4,100. That's kind of the top and bottom of the spread there. Perine, I think, is again a great option this week and is a good leverage point off of Jamal Williams. And then Deion Jackson is pretty much min priced, and he should get a lot of action with the Colts this week. we'll have to see how everything shakes out with Zach Moss, Deion Jackson, and Evan Hull. It could be a pretty interesting backfield. They could actually be a pretty split backfield, and so that's why I prefer Deion Jackson in tournaments versus because I think there's some people wanting to take the savings with Deion Jackson at 4,100 in cash, but I think it's just a little bit too volatile. But I do think if there is some points to be had and there is some, some pass catching that's going to happen, I think Deion Jackson would be the big beneficiary there with Anthony Richardson. And then in the receiver tree, I've got four different options here to fill in that last spot. So starting at the top is Jahan Dotson at 5,000 for the Commanders. Then we got Van Jefferson 4,700 for the Rams, Zay Jones 4,500 for the Jags, and Zay Flowers 4,000 for the Ravens. I don't think any of these guys are going to catch too much ownership this week. They all should be pretty low owned, and so that's a good. I think that's a great option to try to fit in your the end of the lineup there and really kind of tie things together. I think all these guys have had big games in the past. Zay Flowers is a rookie, obviously, but he's been blowing up in camp, and I think he could really come out of the gates firing here for the Ravens, especially if Mark Andrews is ruled out. That would be a big bump in Zay Flowers. In his position. So yeah, that kind of rounds it up. I think we've got again at the end you'll as you make lineups for the first three columns, you will have anywhere between 4 and 5,000 bucks left. And so just firing the way that I do it, right, is I kind of build through the first three columns and then I fit a guy in, and then I, swap. I go back to the third column, swap two guys in for the other two, see what that leaves me in the last column. Boom, there's another lineup. And it looks like a lot on paper. It looks like holy crap, this is really, um, this is hard to figure out. Like there's a lot going on, but I'm hoping through kind of the discussion every week, walking everybody through my thought process, and then basically, getting as many different combinations in as you can should really help things up. So I think we'll kind of wrap it up there. Cole asked a quick question here. How much salary are you comfortable leaving on the table for GPPs? And I think the answer to this is not that much, really. I think 1 or 200 bucks is really about the max that I'll go with. Try to land at as close to $50,000 as possible. There's been some good articles by Establish the Run for the last few years. They have a free one up right now that says, how to win the Millie Maker, right? And typically there's only about 100 or 200 dollars left on the table for like the top 1% of lineups that land in the Millie Maker. So definitely try to maximize your salary every week, especially on a week like this week where there's so much salary value. You can really go up a couple $100, go down a couple $100, and still find some pretty good value. So I think that'll wrap it up. I appreciate everybody tuning in on the live stream. A lot of fun. Definitely want to we'll keep this going every Saturday. We'll hopefully as we get through the season, we can kind of talk through some more different game theory aspects, some more different strategy specific items when it comes to DFS. I don't want this just to be kind of like a picks show, just to be like a hey, play these guys. I want to also talk through some of the strategy, some of the concepts, some of the leverage spots, things like that. That can help us kind of build and be successful DFS players. But appreciate everybody tuning in, and we'll wrap it there. Well, good luck in week one, and hope to see you all at the top of the leaderboards. Later.